I like Star Wars, long walks on the beach. My name is Jeremy Williams. I have been living in Texas for about 8.5 years. Prior to that, I grew up in Southern California, was raised in the church, and married my wife about 15 years ago, and we have 3 kids. I've got 2 sisters. Like I said, my parents moved us to California when I was probably about 3 or 4, as part of almost a church expansion. They were part of a church back in McLean, Virginia, and a group of them moved to Georgia. My parents didn't make that trip, but God called them to California. It must have been 81, I believe. Yeah, 80, 81, somewhere in there. And so I was pretty much raised in a family church. It was one of those situations where everybody knew everybody knew everybody's business. And so as I grew older, there comes this expectation of what you're supposed to be like in church. And I think for me personally, it was almost a hindrance, because my personality is such that unless somebody gives me a reason behind a rule or something like that, then I tend to kind of buck it a little bit. And that's the way it was with religion. They talk about, you shouldn't have sex before marriage, or you shouldn't smoke, or you shouldn't drink, or whatever. You shouldn't listen to rock and roll because it's bad for you. I was that person, that kid that did everything the opposite of what you were told not to do. And so that I was I think I consider myself the black sheep of the family, because my sisters, I always felt like were always good, never getting in trouble, and I was always the one getting in trouble. Also too, there's probably that case of I did everything and I was always the one in trouble, so they were able to get away with other stuff because the focus was always on me. So, the church had its own school. So, there was never a separation of church and school. Like, I hated growing up in the church. I hated going to a Christian school. I begged my parents to let me go to a public school. And looking back on it now, they were first generation Christians. They didn't know anything else. And so to them, doing the Christian school, they only knew one thing. And so growing up, it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't stand this. And then, add to that the different layers of what it is growing up, with a father who is there but isn't, and all the relationships that you want to form that I don't think I ever did form. I think as I grew up and was able to make choices on my own, then I think there started to become that resentment of, you're telling me not to do something, but you're not giving me the reason not to do it. And, as I got older and as my life moved on, and, there's more to that story, I came to realize that there is a reason behind the not doing something, but it isn't the religious aspect of it. There's a deeper purpose to it. My dad, we've talked, never was physically abused, and I don't even think his mom was physically abused, but the emotional abuse that came with it, there was a lot of that. And in talking with my dad about this interview, because I wanted to call him and let him know, like, there might be some things that we talk about that you and I have talked about, but it's now going to be out there. Other people are going to see it. I didn't even know this, but his dad was a World War II vet. No, World War I vet. And he obviously saw some things which defined who he was when he came home. And I think anybody who's a soldier, they can attest to, you see things and you bear witness to things. It changed him. And I think that's really the root of everything that happened as my dad was being raised with his two, because he had two sisters too. And so, it changed my dad, because there was a verbal, emotional abuse, because his dad's an alcoholic. He doesn't know how to handle emotions. He doesn't know how to process what it is to have PTSD when nobody knew what PTSD was. And, and my dad, to his credit, I mean, I'm sure we'll go into this more, but to his credit, he made a commitment early on with the Lord, like, I am not going to be like my father. Like, I will not verbally abuse. I will not emotionally abuse my kids. And he never did. But there was also a pulling back almost. It's almost like he didn't know how to be a father. And so when things got tough, when he actually had to, it became more of being that example to your kids, not just raising you. Like, when you have kids that are, 4, 5, 6, up to 10, there's not really a emotional connection there. I mean, they're your kids and you love them, you care for them. It's only when they become more formative in their formative years that there really has to be this connection. And when my sisters and I reached that age, like, he almost pulled back because he didn't know how to do it. My dad and I have had conversations about this before, and I told him, I'm like, I've forgiven you. Like, I've been raised over the last 15 years in under a word that is, your past doesn't define who you are. So when God said, you're mine, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm yours, that shifted everything, because that changes the narrative. Now you're not just your dad's son, you're your father's son, and that carries with it a whole different narrative, a whole different level of acceptance. My dad kind of checked out. He was there, he was present, he came home from work, but he wasn't there. And so the conversation would usually be left up to my mom to have. And I think, now that we're talking about it, I think there are some conversations that a mom doesn't necessarily want to have with her son. And she may have shied away from those. I don't know. But I think also too, I think there's an innate desire, if you don't know who you are, to be rebellious, to figure out who it is you want to be. And I think every kid goes through that phase. Now, if you have like our pastor, who has a family, a mother and a father, who there was a very defined sense of what honor and family was, yeah, you still kind of buck that trend a little bit because you're growing and you're developing yourself and who you want to be. But it always comes back to the honor and the relationship that you have with your parents. So if you're not necessarily honoring your parents because you don't necessarily respect your parents, that takes you, I think, into a whole, a different kind of path that God in his sovereignty can easily bring you back from. But maybe it's a little more difficult. Maybe the road getting back to where you need to be is a little more bumpy. Doesn't mean you don't get back to it. It just means you have to work a little bit harder to undo some of the things that, maybe the habits that were developed. So I lived on my own for maybe a year, and it was a split year. So I was at San Diego State. I started there in a spring semester, lived in the dorms, but still went home on the weekends. And then lived with a couple of roommates who I met in the dorms for the fall semester, which was an absolute disaster. That was the only time I ever lived on my own. I think I also tend to, take the easy way out. So it was a lot easier to live with the parents, especially when the option is there. And so that was pretty much all my college years. After kind of fumbling through San Diego State, moved back home, tried to get my wits about me, so to speak. Ended up at Cal State Fullerton, which was a disaster, and ended up pretty much flunking out of school. So I have to go back to the father figure that I had. It also kind of defined what dating was. And my dad and I were having this conversation like before this interview, and he made a comment like, when you don't have that person in your life that you expect to find, the expectation of what a father is, you go looking for it somewhere else. Some people find it in drugs, some people find it in drinking, some people find it in other, in their work. I found it in dating. And so from probably high school, junior, senior year, up until probably 2000 or so a string of probably like 5 or 6 years, I had a steady string of girlfriends that never lasted more than, I think the longest was 2 years maybe. And I met a girl, and I kind of liked her. It wasn't my wife. And, we got to talking, and she's like, I'm on a dating fast. I'm like, sounds unique. I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, maybe I'll give that a try. Like, just kind of the back of my mind, like, who knows? I've tried everything else. And so I think that was probably 6 months. And during that time, I'm not going to my parents' church. I'm actually going to, there was a Calvary Chapel in California had a Monday night church that was called Sanctuary. And it was young people. I'm still a little bit older than some of them, but it was so different and so dynamic, that I started seeing church differently, not the very structured, very, what I was raised in. So it kind of, it's like, okay, this is a little different. And then I was also going to a Sunday night church called Rock Harbor. And so during this time, like, I think God subtly is starting to whittle away at some stuff. And, I actually met my wife during this dating fast that I was doing based on the opinion of another girl that I was sort of interested in, and met a guy who we became friends, and he actually was dating my wife at the time. And so we start, my wife and I, we start talking. We're just at this point like friends. We're all together in a big group. It's kind of, sometimes it's a church setting, sometimes it's, going down to a restaurant in Dana Point and hanging out till late. And it was a friend thing. And then my friend at the time ended up cheating on her. And she disappeared. I pretty much left that kind of scene because, like, dude, what is up? I mean, I was like, what are you doing? And, all this time, there's little things that God's doing. Like, what's funny is the very guy that cheated on, who is now my wife, is the very guy that helped me get to a conference where I really had one of those first conversations with my wife. And it was called a college briefing, and it was in 2001, August 2001. And I remember the first night of worship, And I remember it's one of the probably the 3 times that I distinctly heard God's voice. And he basically told me, he's like, you need to tell her how you feel. And my conversation back to him was, if I do that, it's over. And his response back to me was, if you don't, then whatever you came up here for the weekend for, you're not going to get it. Okay. So, very uncomfortably, and mind you, I hadn't dated anybody now at this point probably for a year. And so I told her, I'm like, okay, well, just want to let you know, I kind of like you. And she's like, that's nice. Okay. I remember the conversation, I'm like, I don't either. I have to tell you this, because I'd rather have something happen this weekend with God than being consumed by my thoughts for you. And so, it ended up being a great weekend. I mean, it was a lot of fun with a lot of different people, met a lot of different people, but I think probably all that would have been washed away had I not said something, because I think the whole weekend I would have been consumed with, I like you, but I don't want to say anything, and all that. So that was 2001. And then probably it took, I want to say probably close to a year before anything was reciprocated. All this time, we're kind of hanging out, becoming friends, and looking back on it, I realized what God was doing. He was helping develop that foundation. Going back just a little bit, in that time frame of a year or so, where we weren't dating, I was actually reading a book called Wild at Heart, by John Eldridge. And one of the things, it's a great book. It talks about, raising sons and growing up, how to be a man. But one of the things I remember is he talks about the pursuit, how the woman wants to be pursued. And so I took that to heart, like, okay, so I'll pursue her. I don't know how that's going to look, but I'll be patient. But there were bumps, but I was patient, or at least I felt like I was patient. She might have a different viewpoint of that. And so this whole time, like, just, okay, all right, God. And now I'm getting close. As we're getting closer, I'm like, this is it. I have no interest in anybody else. She's got me. She hasn't said yes, but she's got me. And her story is, I remember we were on a family vacation in the Bahamas, and this was 2003 maybe. I'm not sure of the date. But I remember just desperately missing her. Like, oh my gosh, this almost hurts. And I think that's probably the time where I really felt like, this is my wife, and I'm done. And that was probably one of the first true, somewhat in-depth conversations that I had with my dad. Like, how did you know that mom was it? And so, he shared his experience, and it was a sort of a bonding moment, as much as a somewhat estranged father and son can have. But it's the only one I had at that point. And so, her story, I hear from her side, she actually turned 21 on that same weekend that we were in the Bahamas. And, she tells me later, like that's the point where she started to, I think she so slowly started to realize, like, okay, this is it. Because she's like, I miss you. Like, I was happy my friends were there, but you weren't there. And so it was like, I mean, so we're on, we're coming together slowly but surely, because God's kind of doing this. There were things that she taught me in our relationship and even in our marriage that maybe I didn't see because of the way my family was. Like, one of the things that her family always did whenever they left the house was, I love you. My family never did that. It was just, bye, see you later. When are you coming home? Oh, I don't know. When I get home. But every time they left the house, I love you. I'm like, that's different. I can remember when I started doing it just to see how it felt. It felt so weird when I did it at my house. Like, I love you, as I was leaving. Very awkward for a while. And I don't necessarily think it changed anything, but it did for me. I ended up back at my parents' church. And when I come back, there's a man who had started coming. He brought a very different dynamic to the church. He was a black man from North Carolina who was a prophet, who was a preacher, and who traveled. And he would get up and preach, and something in my spirit was like, this is something different. And what it was he was preaching kingdom, the kingdom of God, what it means to be a son. And so you don't have this now. It was the base layer, the foundation for what was to come. And he started pouring into me. He started pouring into a couple other people, who I found out later, God actually brought him to that church because he wanted him to pour into some people, me being one of them. Tyla was coming occasionally. She wasn't crazy about it. But as he started pouring in, and we were meeting on, I think, Tuesday nights at people's homes, and like, he was taking us deeper into the scripture. He was talking about what it means to prophesy and what it means to have a kingdom relationship, and again, very base layer, but there was substance to it. There was something more than just you do this because the Bible says to. What it really started to do was open my eyes that there was more. And then in 2004, he let us know that, hey, I'm going to be going to Africa. I want to take a team. Here's who I want to be on the team. Pray about it. If God wants you to go, you'll have to raise the money, but this is what we're going to do. My wife was all in. We were dating. I mean, we were still dating. But she was all in. She's like, I'm going. And raised the money. She was gone. I was a little on the fence. Like, I didn't know if I wanted to, didn't know if God was calling me to that. And so I kind of hung back, and which brings me to probably the second, I think that was the second time that God really spoke to me. Sitting in my bed, in my room, praying about it. And like, they were weeks away from leaving, and they had been raising money for a good month. I hadn't raised a dime. I'm like, all right, well, we'll deal with this when we come back. And I remember God being like, why? Do you not think I can do it? God, do you want me to go? And I remember I was listening to Israel Houghton and New Breed, and the song It's a New Season was on. and just felt like the Lord was saying, I'm taking you into a new season. Do this. It actually kind of worked out because I ended up getting the engagement ring and asking, as my wife left, I stayed behind and asked her dad if he'd allow me to marry her. And that trip to Africa, though, was absolutely amazing. I mean, the stuff that God showed, not only in what it looks like to have restoration, but to see what happens when you are in the middle of a group and you literally have all hell breaking loose around you. I mean, literal hell, to the point where it had gotten so bad. We were in our hotel room as a group kind of discussing like, hey, what's going on? What are we gonna do? And one of the team members literally walked out into the hallway, stepped out, and fell backwards, dead. Like, literally death had entered the room. And it was, now, here I am, church kid, growing up in the church. I had never seen anything like this before in my life. Like, and my wife was, I mean, she was freaked, because, I mean, she didn't grow up in church, and now now this is happening. It's like, oh my Lord, what is going on? And that was the first time that I ever saw what happens when prayer and literally believing in the true power of God can happen when two or more are gathered in a room. Because I saw what it looks like to for somebody to literally not give up on anything. I mean, this woman who was just a powerhouse in prayer. Like, I mean, just an absolute prayer warrior. Literally was like going after this thing, and it was probably about, I don't know, it felt like forever, but it was probably 10-15 minutes, and all of a sudden, like, she just sat up, like, like, oh my gosh, what just been craziest thing in the world. You know, I asked my wife to marry me. It was like the end of the conference, and we're the most awkward engagement request of all time, probably, was probably 10 or 15 minutes of just me stumbling over words, knowing full well that she was going to say yes, but just rambling and making a complete mess of things. But in the end, you know, she did say yes, and everybody was up in the room just waiting, like, because they knew, you know, my friend Michael had told them that, like, hey, he's going to do this. And so we get up to the room and they're all waiting, like, well, yes. And it was amazing. We get married in May of 2005. And I had gone to a conference in April of that same year. So just the previous month, to Resurrection Life. Resurrection Life is Pastor Will's dad's church, and they were having a conference, and I remember that day. Oh wow. So that day, because we're still, you know, we were looking for a place to live. We had actually decided we were going to buy a house. Anybody familiar with California prices knows that you don't get much for your money. We were looking at paying $310,000 for about a 2-bedroom little apartment condominium, and found out pretty much that day of the conference that I was going to that it had fallen through because there were structural issues, and the bank isn't going to approve anything. So now we're less than a month away from being married. We have no place to live. I remember sitting at a light in Newport Beach. I had just gotten done with work and found this out, and was like, Lord, what are you doing? don't know. And went to the conference that night. And I just remember the worship being the most amazing thing that I'd ever heard. I'd been listening to a lot of Hillsong worship at the time, and that's what they were singing. And so what was amazing is you had the spirit of worship combined with songs that I knew, and I just went into it. Like, I had nothing, I was weeping. I was just a mess. You know, my wife wasn't there. She was going through school at the time, so she was studying for some finals. And I was there with a couple other people, Michael, my friend, being one of them. And God just wrecked me. Like, I didn't know what had shifted, but I knew something had. And after service, Michael took us up, introduced us to Bishop Hinn, Pastor Will's dad. And one of the guest speaker that night was a man named Tudor Bismarck, who is I believe he's a pastor in South Africa, or Kenya, I think maybe. But anyway, powerful, powerful man of God. Little, somewhat short, skinny guy, just amazing power, walking in the presence. And my friend Michael had some interactions with him, and so he came up, and there was me and my friend Michael and a couple other people who had come with us to the conference, and he's going around and talking, and he keeps looking back at me, just goes around talking, comes back. I'm like, dude, what's going on? Do I have like something on my face? Like, what's going on? And in this very African, I'm pretty sure it was Kenyan accent, he's like, the Spirit of God is all around you. And then went back to talking. Like, okay, what? And, these are all things that God's doing in the midst of bringing me to a deeper understanding of who He is. I remember my wife met us up for dinner afterwards. I was telling her about what happened. I'm like, I feel like that might be where we end up. She's like, well, not right now. We're not even married yet. I'm like, no, down the road. Like, I just feel like this is something that's coming. Okay. So we get married in May. I think it was probably the first. We'd gone on our honeymoon, come back, and I think it was the first service that we went to after getting back from our honeymoon. We had the most amazing time of worship in my parents' church that I had ever experienced. I'm like, wow, what just happened? And then just when you get to that moment where, and we're kind of familiar with this now, like where the presence is about to drop and you're just about to see something that is amazing. The pastor got up and it just went like we hit a wall. I'm like, what? And one of the team members who had been meeting in this group, I looked over, he was to my right. We looked and we're just like, that's it. They don't want to go any farther. They're comfortable in their 4 or 5 song set, offering message, and going home. Now, we've been seeing things, we know there's more. And at that point, I'm like, it was at that moment that I looked at my wife and I'm like, we're done. This is it. We went home and like, where are we going? And I was working for Starbucks, which is a whole different, that's another rabbit trail. But I'm all, go to this church. Just go see what you think. And so she went. She came home. She's like, it was long. I'm like, Yeah. But what was crazy is Bishop Hinn talked in a language that she understood. And she came home and was like, it was long. But yeah, this is where God's calling us. It's like, okay. So I had been part of a men's group at that point. And, a couple of them had stood with me at my wedding. They were friends that I'd known since high school, but they weren't friends. They were very surface level. There was never a deep friendship, deep relationship. And so the following Sunday, I went like, hey, so God's calling us away. I'm thinking, hey, that's great. What do you think? What's going on? Where are you going to go? Hey, let's bless you. Nope. Complete opposite. It was, it was rage is all from my perspective, what I witnessed was absolute rage. How dare you leave this church? This is not what we do. And I remember sitting in the chair. I said what I needed to say, that we were leaving. And then I can almost visibly remember seeing almost like two shields come up like this. So they were talking and I felt like they're hurling darts. Nothing's hitting me. And I'm seeing all this happen. And then I remember a question somebody asked, and I think it might have been the pastor's son, asked, why do you feel like you need to leave? Shields came down. And I remember, because you've gone as far as you're going to go. And then the shields came back up. It was just like that little, not necessarily a dart to be mean, but it was literally what I was feeling and what I was sensing in the spirit is that church at that moment they were only willing to go so far. And having bared witness to so much more in just a short amount of time and wanting it, I didn't want just this 9:30 to 11 church service and then you go about your day and you go about your week and you come back on Sunday morning and you do it all again. And I was done. It wasn't bearing fruit. And so at the time, it was just, I want more. There's so much more of God out there and I want it. There was one guy there who actually brought a little bit of calm to the scene. And he was a little bit older, but he said, I remember him saying, why are we attacking him for something that God's calling him to? I think anybody who grew up in that, who's been there knows, and who has ever heard Bishop Hinn, you can't help but have your life changed and know that. And this is where I started to find out what it means to be a son and what it means to be fathered and to be truly fathered. Because he started pouring into me as a father would. And there were other men in the church Pastor Mark Ritchie, who you've met, being one of them as well. So all of a sudden now, without realizing it, I'm starting to have true father figures start to pour in and I'm starting to see an example of what a father is and what a father should be. And I'm developing male relationships, male friendships that are, and I'm as I was preparing for this, realizing the these are men who I've been walking with now for 15 years and have poured into me, have poured into my family. I was talking to my wife last night, and something the Lord had showed me when my first child was born. I remember bringing her home, and my wife took the car seat, walked back to the house that we were living in, and I remember staying behind, closing the door, and lost it. Like the weight of realizing, oh my gosh, I'm a dad. I'm responsible for a child. Like the whole definition of what it was to be a husband now has shifted to, now you're a father. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am freaking out. Like, my wife's not seeing this, so which is probably a good thing, because it probably would have been like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know, I'm scared. But in that moment, I remember I called Bishop Hinn, and he talked with me, he listened, he's like, you're gonna be a great dad. But what hit me last night is I didn't call my dad. I didn't even call my friend Michael Dalton, who I'd been walking with for, at this point, 6-7 years. I called my spiritual father. God was like, I've put men in your life that you can trust. I've put men in your life that have walked with you, who have encouraged you, who have been an encouragement to your wife, who has been an example to your kids. There's this sense of what a family is when it comes to this church. And I think any family especially who comes in realizes there's something very different about what it means to be family here. Whether you grew up in a dysfunctional family or whether even you grew up in a great family. Here we are, 15 years later, 3 kids later, and there's this fathering that has taken place where you start to realize, like, I'm a son, and there's a very big difference in being a son and being a father. But when you've been fathered properly, being a son is easy. It ceases to become, your relationship with Jesus is not, oh, what can I do today not to disappoint you? It's, you're my dad, you're my father. Like, you love me no matter what. We started Resurrection Life in 2005. The church was in California. They're still in California. So, it was, he started it in Florida. A bunch moved to California. And then the tail end of 2011, I think it was December of 2011. He's like, I was on a trip. Oh, he had been to South Africa. And the Lord had got him up and said, start a church in Texas. So he comes back and he has no idea. He's never been to Texas. It's like, this is what the Lord said. I'm going to go out there and just check it out and see what happens. But I don't even know if I'm going. But I just feel like this is the Lord, and okay. So, the church is praying about it. He's gone out to visit, or I should say, well, we're in Texas now, so he's come out to visit. And then in February of 2012, again, I'm still working at Starbucks. I'm working in Newport Beach. And I had become, at that point, I was opening every day. So I would get to the store at 4:30, take my lunch break around 7:30, 8 o'clock before the morning rush started. And there was this 1 mile loop around the store. And I started kind of doing a little run through it or a walk or whatever the case may be. And I remember this particular morning, it was a Friday. I just was like, I'm going to walk today. I'm just going to walk up to this one point, and I just felt like the Lord leading me in that direction. And backtrack real quick. So there had been a conversation with our friends Michael and Deanna, and he had asked, like, are you going to move? I'm like, no, not a chance. Like, Texas, really? I'm like, I told him, and these were my words. God's going to have to audibly speak and hit me in the gut for me to be like, okay, yeah, we're moving. On this particular day, it was probably one of the most gorgeous days I had seen in a long time. Like, it was just sunny, smooth water, perfect temperature. You could see for miles. Like, you could see Catalina out in the distance and even farther. And all of a sudden, I feel like I get hit in the gut, and I hear God say, I'm moving you. I'm like,
was that the third time?
That would be the third time. I'm not saying anything to my wife at this point. I'm like, I'm just gonna let it go. I know we're going. We didn't think anything of it the first time he made the announcement. It was the very next so Friday was when I heard the Lord say, I'm moving you. That next Saturday night, because we were meeting on Saturday nights, Bishop made the announcement that this is where we're going to be, and the family is moving, meaning his family, which is for me, it was important because I knew that God was moving us before Bishop said that they were moving. So I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that we weren't moving because of him. We were moving because God said to. I came home. She heard the announcement that they were leaving, that they were going. I walked through the door thinking, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let this play out, see what God does. She looks at me. She's like, we're moving, aren't we? I'm like, I don't want to say yes or no, but I think it's yes. She's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. And fought it for months. And I'm not going to say anything about that because that's her testimony. But then in end of July of that same year. So I knew in February, it took us to July to get out of Dodge. We had our friends, Harry and Michelle, had settled in McKinney. And we're thinking, we'll be near them. We'll be in McKinney. So that's where we started looking. We had reached out to a home finder person out here, and they were helping us try to find a rental. And we'd found one. We were pretty much on the verge of signing the papers so that we had someplace to go because we were already set to leave on a particular date. And the agent calls us and says, so the homeowner, the landlord, has gotten a better offer. What are you willing to do? And I'm thinking, we've agreed. What is there to add? Not really kind of knowing what goes on here in Texas and the housing market that it was at that point. Like, nothing. Like, we've kind of come to an agreement. We're just waiting to sign the papers. And she's like, well, he's going to go with the better offer. Okay. God, you said go, so we're still going to go. Ended up finding a place in Allen. And it ended up being the perfect, I think we kind of knew almost right away because the kids, it was an empty place and the kids were just in love with it. Like, my oldest was 5. No, she was 4. She was going to be 5 that September. And then my youngest, he was 2, I think at that time, maybe just turned 3. No, he was 2. But they were just running around. They were loving it. Completely empty space. They'd been pretty much cooped up for 3 days in a car. So they're kind of loving this, and we just felt such peace about it. It just is so worked out, the time frame of it. So we pulled in, and within, I think, 72 hours, we had a place to live, moved in, kind of starting to get settled. And then slowly but surely, everybody else who had been called out here started trickling in. And to where I think by end of August, I think we kind of had our kickoff of Resurrection Life in Texas. And we labored. It was, there was, for a period of, for most of the time, like it was 30 of us, maybe 50, 60 on a good night. And we met in a hotel, we met at a building in Grapevine, we actually met here in this building in the Colony. And all that time, Bishop's laboring, wondering why is nobody coming? Why aren't we getting the numbers? And meanwhile, his sons are growing up, and they're starting to go where God's called them. And I'm kind of sitting in the background with Michael, back in the sound booth, and we're having conversations like there's a shift coming, like we can sense it, we can feel it. Like we get this sense like, I think we're gonna explode when the sons take over. And this, oh gosh. So Pastor Will, I think that he is probably, we've been here since 2012. So I think maybe in 2014, 2015, maybe, he is having this idea of resignation. And I remember coming to the first one in this building where we met in the bell tower. And that was the only one I was really able to go to. Like between work and family, trying to make this drive to the Colony was difficult at best. But his, the story of resignation is, they met here, they met in coffee shops, and slowly but surely, like it became, until I think it was it August of last year? A little bit before that, because we actually launched August of last year. God's like, you're going to be a church. And for my wife and I, it wasn't even a question. Like, we came out here for the work. We didn't come out here to serve Bishop. We came out here for the church. Add to that, you've now suddenly got this very much younger crowd with kids. And at that time, we were really the only ones in Resurrection Life with kids. Some of the younger generation were starting to have kids, but ours at this point are 6, 7. We had a newborn at that point, but we're still, our kids are really kind of the older ones in the church, and there's really nothing for them. So resignation comes along, and now we have kids church. There's kids their age. It's like, this is a no-brainer. And it also helped too that the Bishop launched us. He basically, it was, this is going to be Resurrection Life for all intents and purposes, but it's resignation. When the church launched, I had seen men in our church, Resurrection Life, assist Bishop. They were, you call them armor bearers, you call them assistants, somebody that was just there to meet the needs of the pastor. I noticed nobody was doing that for Will, so I'm like, I'm gonna do it. It's what it's showing honor to the man of the house. We were serving where there was a need. It's not anything that we thought about. We weren't trying to get anything out of it. We certainly weren't trying to be noticed, because for me personally, I like being in the background. I remember I was driving home from a client's house in Frisco, and Will calls me up. Yes, sir. Hey, so we've been talking and praying, and we'd like you and Tyler to be elders. I'm sorry, what? What? Huh? You want us to do what? Which, I mean, he talked about what the expectation was and what his vision of what an elder in the church would be. I didn't hear any of that. I just heard, you want us to be elders. And after that was more of a wah, 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 wah. Because if you want me to be truly uncomfortable, just put me out front. And this actually had been a slow process of God kind of whittling away of my security and starting to make me be uncomfortable, and using will to do it. There is a worship until the presence comes, and then not leaving it until God says, move on. And sometimes you just linger there. And I just remember every Sunday just getting wrecked. And I remember one Sunday he called me up after he had preached and we'd gone back into worship and I'm on the ground. He's like, get him up. He's like, and he spoken to me. He's like, you're going to pastor. People in this room are going to trust you. And God's calling you out from the back and he's going to put you up in the front, put you towards the front. And I'm just like, no, he's not. But at this point, I'm barely standing. I'm like, okay. But slowly but surely since that point, there's just been sliver after sliver after sliver of my comfort level being whittled away. It's still uncomfortable. I still really don't like it. But I know God is pulling more and more out of me and whittling away me and replacing it with him. It's only when I resist that it becomes difficult. But it's, there's a freeing that happens as well when you just let him work. Little by little, getting pulled on more and more to where it's just all that's left is God and that relationship that you have with Jesus. And it comes down to, you can say you want more, but until you truly give yourself over to the more, he'll give you more, but he'll only give you to what your expectation is. But I think of conversations that I've had with different men in the church who are coming in and realizing that, I've kind of spoken into their lives. And so, yeah. Yes, very, very. But there's also this sense of God saying, I've prepared you for this. And so as long as I stay true to who he is and speak only what is being told to speak, then if you're obedient and you're only saying what he says to say, you're not going to lead somebody wrong. It's when you let yourself get in the way that it becomes a problem. And there's been plenty of times that I've really felt like God saying, go do this. And I'm like, is that me? Did I just do that? Did I just say that? Did I just put that in my head? Or is that God? And I'll ignore it. But then he always has this habit of bringing it around again. Are you going to do it this time? okay. And it's uncomfortable because, you know, it could be that person at the gym and you're just like, dude, bro, I know you're in the middle of your set, but I just feel like the Lord's saying this for you. So is that person gonna be like, thanks, and I'm never gonna come to this gym again because you might be here and you're gonna make me feel weird? Or is it the opposite of like, wow, thank you? But it's when you're outside, when you're in Kroger, or when you're at the gym, or, you know, just getting done having coffee with a friend and get in your car and like, Lord's like, hey, those 3 kids over there that are smoking, just go tell them that I love them. I'm sorry, what? And then you have an argument with him for 5 to 10 minutes, realizing that you're not going to win. And then you end up going over there and telling him that, and okay, just felt like the Lord needed to say that, and then walk away. You know, you don't know what that little, hey, just want to let you know that God loves you, does. You know, I remember that actually did happen. And I remember in that instance, like 2 of them were just like, yeah, whatever. But then there was one that was just like, you could see it kind of, there was a weight that hit him. It's not our job to foster whatever that is. I mean, it might be. All our job is to do what God says and let him worry about the repercussions. And so, I mean, who's to say that kid didn't just change his life? Sometimes you look at where you're at in the moment and think, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm missing the mark. God's not working. Why am I struggling so much? And one of the things that I found in this process is, while I was preparing what I thought was going to be the conversation, I started to realize how far God had brought me from where I was at. And so don't look at your present moment. Sometimes you just got to go back and look at your past and just kind of let God, hey, look at what I did. Look at what I've brought you from. Yeah, you may feel down now, but bear witness to what I've done and know that I'm always with you. You know, he tells us he never leaves us or forsakes us. You know, one of my favorite verses is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. I mean, what more do you need?